This is Ashley Adamson-Edwards for 26.3, estimating VO2 max. So, over the decades of modern sport and society itself, individuals are required to endure long periods of time where they are always working. From the marathons ran by Mo Farah to the general 9 to 5 job that often feels never ending, people are always in need of a strategy that will help them to find them through the day. However, to endure these circumstances, people's bodies are already equipped with the essential tools that they need and only require the individual to make them stronger to ensure that they are at work efficiently. Long amounts of exercise or work are powered by the aerobic respiration system. This is where oxygen is used to combine with glucose to provide energy for working muscles. However, this system can only sustain exercise at a moderate level and cannot fully contribute towards actions like sprinting, whereas aerobic respiration is more suited for longer, less intense exercises such as long distance running or swimming. Despite this, the ability at which an individual can use their aerobic respiration is determined by their aerobic capacity, otherwise known as VO2 max. This was described as the maximal rate of oxygen consumption by Stickland in 2003. More specifically, it refers to the amount of oxygen that someone's body can utilize per kilogram that they weigh every minute. Depending on a person's VO2 max, there are several consequences to both sport and health. Therefore, VO2 max is often measured to make people aware of these consequences and how their bodies are affected. The oxygen consumed by a participant has a relationship with the intensity that they are working at. This is because as someone increases their oxygen consumption, their exercise intensity increases linearly. However, this would only be the case for what is called a maximal test, which can't always be used. Therefore, when the most advanced equipment can't be used, researchers can also use the relationship between the heart rate and exercise intensity, consequently allowing them to gain an absolute value no matter what circumstances. In terms of health, there are several. Let me just zoom this in. Just here in terms of health, there are several reasons as to why someone may want to measure their VO2 max. Firstly, it has been linked with improving someone's cognitive function. This is because, as pointed out, VO2 max refers to how quickly a person's transfer of it's how quickly a person can transfer oxygen to their muscles. As muscles need oxygen to contract and therefore make movements, a higher VO2 max score will obviously mean that an individual's actions can take place at a quicker rate. As cognitive function is often important to how healthy someone is regarded to be, a direct link between a person's VO2 max and their health is indicated. Furthermore, it has also been pointed out that persons with type 2 diabetes, mellitus DM, have a decreased maximal oxygen consumption and submaximal oxygen consumption during a graded exercise compared with healthy controls. This statement from Burr 1998 shows that someone who has type 2 diabetes often doesn't have a too high VO2 max result. This correlation can point towards testing and trying to improve their VO2 max to in turn prevent them from being associated with this correlation, consequently minimizing their chances of gaining type 2 diabetes. On the other hand, an individual may also want to measure their VO2 max due to sporting connotations. For example, the extent of talent in endurance athletes can be pinpointed and identified by a VO2 max test. This is because if an athlete has a high or strong result, it can be strongly suggested that they also have a healthy cardiovascular system. As this is an essential component to what makes a talented endurance athlete, sports clubs could precisely pick out the select individuals that perfectly match what they are looking for. In turn, meaning that they have scouted an athlete that is able to get oxygen to their working muscles faster and in turn prevent muscles from fatiguing at an earlier stage of competition. For example, the typical successful cyclist usually has a VO2 max score of around 80. Therefore, a cyclist organisation could use this data to pick out athletes who would be best suited to a successful career in the sport. Consequently, meaning that they can identify that talent through measuring someone's VO2 max. However, just because an athlete is displaying VO2 max results that are perfect for a sport doesn't always mean that they will be successful. This is because although they may possess the ideal physical aspect to compete in the sport, um, however they may lack the technical side of things. For instance, a footballer In football, a central midfielder would need a strong VO2 max score to deal with the physically demanding aspects of playing in that position. Therefore, if an athlete was identified to match these VO2 max results, then they may be asked to a trial or to gain so that a club can gain an understanding about their potential. But if this athlete hasn't been trained to their many technical skills involved in the position, they won't be able to perform even the simplest of actions. Furthermore, someone may want to measure their VO2 max to monitor training improvements. This is because the test provides a good indication as to how much an athlete's health has improved, therefore also providing an understanding of how well they will be able to perform with this change result. For example, as a rugby player trains throughout a season, a coach may set targets for them to achieve in terms of fitness so that their improvement can be monitored. By then measuring the athlete's VO2 max, the coach can either upgrade their target or push them to train even harder, or have the intensity that they are training looked at to a further degree. To conclude, a sports person may also want to measure their VO2 max to monitor exercise intensity. This can be done by using various online calculators to give a representation of how hard someone is working by completing a correlation test. This can be helpful as it allows coaches to understand if their athlete is working at the right intensity. For example, if the calculator would point out that an athlete isn't reaching the specific zone that they are aiming for, the coach could then implement more intense exercises. Whereas if they were working too hard, the intensity of the session could be reduced to prevent injury and overload. Whereas an athlete VO2 max does differ between various sports. For instance, a male triathlete has been known to possess a score of 80. On the other hand, though, a weightlifter would only achieve 50. This is because the two different athletes need to work at a different intensity due to the climate of their sports. For example, a triathlete would need to sustain aerobic exercise for extremely long periods of time and would correspondingly require them to consume large amounts of oxygen. This would in turn cause them to have a high VO2 max score, whereas a weightlifter often needs to complete a few high-intensity actions, as a person's VO2 max revolves around their ability to aerobically perform. A weightlifter wouldn't need to achieve as high of a score as the triathlete, therefore indicating the difference in VO2 max results when contrasting sports. However, a VO2 max score can also differ when considering several other factors. For example, Quinn in 2019 states that age plays a central role with VO2 max scores, typically peaking by age 20 and declining by nearly 30% by age 65. Based off this quote, it can be suggested that there is a correspondence between an individual's age and their VO2 max score. This is because as someone gets older, the muscle mass reduces due to its aging cells. As a result, the person can't consume and use as much oxygen. It's also important to mention the two ways that someone can measure VO2 max, which are absolute and relative. Absolute VO2 max refers to a value that is recorded in litres of oxygen per minute. This uses numerical variations to give a representation of an error degree, whereas the absolute measurement shows its flaws when used with a large massed athlete as they use more oxygen. In order to combat this potential issue, researchers often use relative rates. This is where VO2 max results are measured in millimeters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute. Unlike the absolute, this type of data is frequently used to compare the performance of endurance sports athletes. For example, when completing the multi-stage fitness test, the absolute value will be the level and number of shuttles that they completed, whereas, so that this can be compared to a more detailed level with other performers, this value is then converted into the relative value, which is also their VO2 max score. However, to make the conversion often requires a series of calculations to be completed. Much like other testing procedures in research, there are two ways in which a person's VO2 max can be tested. These are direct and indirect measures. Direct measurement of VO2 max could be suggested as far more valid as it uses a precise and graded exercise test to record gases. This is in contrast to an indirect measurement, which instead uses other aspects such as heart rate to make an estimation. With direct measurement, an intensity of exercise a participant is put under is increased at a gradual rate whilst the gases that they inhale and exhale are analysed. This is by measuring the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The value of VO2 max is then able to be recorded once the participant's oxygen consumption plateaus. On the other hand, though, as mentioned, an indirect measurement would use things like relationship between other aspects of the participant's exercise to link with VO2 max. Consequently, basing the research on a predetermined correlation that determines heart rate that has with VO2 max. For instance, the most direct measure that research can use to measure VO2 max is gas analysis. However, an example for an indirect measurement would be the Queen's College Step test. In addition, the test that a researcher uses to gather the VO2 max data can be further categorized into maximal and submaximal tests. These headings are a way of determining the intensity that a test uses to obtain their data from participants. For example, the multi-stage fitness test is regarded as a maximal test. This is because it requires participants to exercise to their max. In other words, in a maximal test, a participant needs to exercise until they are exhausted. These kinds of tests are often preferred by researchers as they can give a more accurate estimation of VO2 max. However, they do put participants under far more physical stress than submaximal tests. Consequently, someone with an underlying health condition can't participate in these tests, as too much strain will be placed on their body. This limits the data from a maximal test to be generalized, as the findings can only be relatable towards healthy individuals, whereas a submaximal test requires participants to be put under steady-state exercise. This is where their bodies are put under reduced physical stress. However, this means that a researcher needs to complete more estimations when trying to convert the data to a relative value. This limits the test accuracy, as more estimations mean that the finding will be tracked further away from the true value. On the other hand, the fact that submaximal test doesn't need participants to work to exhaustion allows a wider range of individuals to be tested on. This is because even people with perhaps a heart condition can take part, as their body won't be forced to work to its absolute maximum. An example of this would be the Queen's College Step Test. There are also a range of all the maximal and submaximal tests. The maximal tests are multi-stage fitness test, the yo-yo test, and the 12-minute Cooper run. Whereas the submaximal tests are the resting heart rate, the resting heart rate and max heart rate test, measuring someone's age, weight, and heart rate, the Chester Step Test, the Forestry Step Test, the Queen's College Step Test, Harvard Step Test, and the Astran Rhyming Cycle Test.